Also have a question? Yes? Oh, I can see Samantha from Abuja as well. Got Albert and Nora. Okay, shall we begin?
Yeah, let's do that. Yes.
Okay, great. So, good afternoon and good evening, and wherever you're joining us from. Thank you so much for joining the Inspiring Futures Education panel discussion with us today. On our panel today, we have Susan Fang, who's a British education specialist who will be moderating the session for us today. We're also joined by Miss Lorraine Atkins, who's next to me right now from Padworth College. We also have Mr. Stuart Nicholson, who's the principal of Bishopstrow College. Hello, Stuart.
Hello, everybody.
And we have James Burnett with us, who is Director of University Services at IES. And today's panel discussion is around benefits of a UK boarding education. So the session is recorded, and we will send the session out, recording out after. If you do have any questions, please feel free to use the chat box. You are also welcome to unmute yourselves as well, and we can then get through the questions. But I will hand over now to Susan.
Thank you very much, Betty, for that lovely introduction. Indeed, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Susan Fang. I'm very privileged to be hosting or moderating today's panel discussion with such lovely people, Lorraine, James, and Stuart. So the world's changed so much, hasn't it, in the last 16 months? And most of us corporate professionals and business owners have gotten used to the idea of working from home. It's very likely that many of us will continue this lifestyle going forward. So, as parents, how would that affect our decision on where to send our children for schooling? So my first question to the panelists is British boarding school still a good idea in this day and age? So I guess my first question would be posing to Stuart, if you...
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Yeah. I very much think so. And I think that perhaps not for the obvious reasons, or perhaps not for the traditional reasons. There is plenty of evidence that one of the major benefits of a boarding school life are some of these softer skills. And I think that in the world that we now live in, and the world as it continues to change, it's going to be many of those softer skills that prove to be key in enabling people to be the most successful in whatever area of life they're entering. So we know that there are the traditional strengths of being really well taught, and you know, the educational excellence that people are familiar with, both at schools and then of course going on to good British universities. But I think perhaps it's going to be increasingly important that the softer skills that are developed mean that people are able to take greater advantage of that. And that, you know, is it a good idea? Yes. Is it perhaps an even better idea? Well, maybe it is.
Thank you for that, Stuart. Very important. Soft skill plus traditional, the hardcore skills will go hand in hand. So it becomes future proof. How about Lorraine? What's your thought on this?
My thoughts on this are I actually think for our students' mental health, it's actually crucial that boarding schools are really seriously thought about by parents, because one of the things that we've seen with the pandemic lockdowns is that students who are at home are very isolated, and we've been able to, at both colleges, able to have a really strong community feeling. Our students have been able to go to classes, and that has actually given significant more confidence and general well-being has been phenomenal in both colleges for the students, purely because we've been able to look after them and ensure that they've done plenty of activities and socialized. We mustn't forget that as human beings, we're actually very, very gregarious, and boarding schools do allow all of our students to maintain that.
I think Lorraine's raised an excellent point here, because even though we are stuck at home, there are many other ways where we can actually still communicate with each other. So perhaps in the past, we were trying to lock down on the screen time, but during the past year, we've all become very savvy on Zoom, Team, and Google Meet and all that. Now, James, I guess you take it from a different point of view, because you're encountering international students on a daily basis. What are your thoughts? Do you think going forward, British boarding school will still have a very good position in the mind of the international students?
I think, first of all, parents plan a long time ahead for their students' education. And a lot of the students who are thinking about going to boarding school in the UK, they're looking at universities not next year or the year after. They're looking at the long term. And I think there's two issues. One is, if you're going to be studying overseas at a university, whether that's in the UK, whether that's in the US, you are going to be in a community. You're going to be surrounded by other people. So the boarding school environment actually prepares you very well for that university experience. I think the second thing is, if you look at lots and lots of surveys over the last year about the effect that COVID's had on international students' university plans, there's not been a huge decrease in the number of students who are planning to study overseas. What there has been is a shift in when they're going to do it. Some have deferred entry, some are looking a little bit further down the line. And there's been a shift in which countries are regarded as better options. So there's been actually increased applications to places like New Zealand, or increased interest in places like New Zealand, Canada, the UK, and less interest in the US. And that's partly because of the way that they've dealt with the COVID issue. So I think the UK boarding school future is very positive in terms of students wanting to come, because it's a step to the next stage.
Oh, that's certainly music to our ears today, isn't it? Everybody here wish that, that this future is going to be brighter. Thank you for that, James. Now, there are schools, British schools as well, overseas, as well as in the UK. So my next question to panelists would be, how do we choose? How should international families choose? Should they put their children in an international school, a British school in their home country, or send them abroad? Stuart, if you could take the first lead.
Yes, of course. I think it's a matter of when is it right for the individual child. And I'm thinking of students we have coming to Bishopstrow who might have been at international schools overseas before they come to us, and they're planning to go to British schools in the UK. And they, I think, find that the British international school experience doesn't feel to them quite as genuine. I can't say, I haven't my own experience to make the comparison, but this is what they seem to be indicating, that they feel that by coming to the UK, they get something which is a more genuine experience of the British educational system. But they feel as though they are well prepared as a starting point by having been in good British international schools in their home countries originally. So I think it's perhaps horses for courses, getting the timing right, understanding the individual child, and getting the right fit. I suspect I'll be saying that many times during the course of the next hour, because the right fit between the child and the school is always going to be key.
Yeah, that seems to be the key word, right fit. Lorraine, you've had experience overseas. You've been ahead of very prestigious boarding schools abroad. So I would be interested to hear your take on this.
Yes, Stuart is right. It has to be the right time for the student. But, as you have said, prior to working for Inspiring Futures Education, I was head of a school in China. One of the benefits of students being at an international school abroad is it starts them on their journey to move to an English-speaking environment, but you cannot ever replicate what it's like to live and work academically in the UK, because you will constantly be going back to your home language. And one of the benefits of being at a boarding school in the UK is the fact that you will be thinking in English and working in English all of the time. And I can't overemphasize the benefits of learning, colloquialisms and generally listening to different ways of creating sentences, and everybody that they will encounter will have a different accent, and that will set them up for university life, because their lecturers will come from all over the country, their colleagues will come, and they will be completely immersed culturally in the UK.
That really resonates with me, because I think accent, experience, and even the connotation or the context of the conversation will be very different. Even maybe the celebrities you follow in China, in Hong Kong, will be very different from the ones that you really follow in the UK, isn't it? Yeah. And children do talk about that. Now, James, again, because of your previous experience and your current experience of dealing with older students, how do you feel? Do you think there is a clear difference between British schools overseas, in the UK, or none at all?
I think there are lots of differences. I mean, I think that a lot of people will just focus on the curriculum, and they'll think that if a school in the UK is offering A level and a school in their country is offering A level, then obviously they're going to get the same experience. But I think, as Lorraine and Stuart have both said, there's a whole range of different experiences that they will get by studying in the UK or studying overseas. And just a couple of points about university entrance. I mean, first of all, if you're aiming for the top ranking universities, if you're a UK boarding school and you're aiming for a UK university, you're studying alongside the competition in a way. You get a much more realistic idea of the standards you have to achieve, the extracurricular activities you need to do, all the reading you have to do, all the other things that go towards getting a place at university. Whereas I sometimes find that international schools will focus very much on the academic side, very much on getting the right grades, but don't give the same sort of support, and there isn't the same peer competition for the students. I think the other point is that if you're a university admissions tutor, a student who's already studying overseas and studying in a school that you recognize, is probably a much safer bet in making an offer to than somebody who has never been out of their own country. So I think it shows that they'll probably cope much better with the university environment because they've already experienced studying in a British environment.
Oh, that's an excellent point, James, because definitely admissions tutors and the faculty at universities, they want to be assured that the students they actually accept will actually fare well, isn't it? It's very much, very good that they've got admitted, but they need to perform and continue and survive and actually graduate.
And I think it also shows their commitment to, particularly if they're applying to British universities, it shows their commitment to a British education. It shows, and on a very mundane point, it shows they can afford a British education as well.
Oh yeah, affordability. Excellent point. Now, follow on that, James, I'll have a follow-on question for you. This year, as well as last year, has been really particular because everywhere around the world has become test optional. No more SATs, GCSE A-levels be cancelled. Having said that, a lot of international schools abroad are still able to take exams, like the international GCSE A-levels that I believe have not been cancelled. So if a student actually applies for overseas with the exam grades compared to an international student in the UK without exam grades, do you think there's going to be a very unfair advantage towards the internationals out in their home country?
No, I mean, I think that the universities will accept whatever system is awarding grades. They need to do that. I think also, the situation of who can sit IGCSEs and who can't is a constantly moving target at the moment. In my daughter's school, which is a school out here in Thailand, they were about to do their IGCSEs, and then because there's been COVID cases, suddenly that's been cancelled, and they're going to work on predicted grades. So I think, particularly for students who are thinking about boarding schools, planning that sort of thing in advance is going to be very, very hard to do. So I don't think that will be a factor at all.
Okay, I mean, this is certainly a very tough year for all the students actually going through the pipeline, coming out of it. And I would not want to wish that upon anybody else. And just like yourself, James, I've got 2 daughters. One is doing GCSE this year, one is doing IB next year. So, God, very tough time. Now, let's move on. So if we have decided that in a few years down the line, or maybe this year, in fact, it's still a good idea to send children to the UK, to a boarding school, what is the best age to send children abroad? In fact, another one is, what is the worst age of sending your children abroad? Let's start with James.
So you give me the tricky question. The best age to send your child abroad is when you as a family think it is the most suitable for them to go in terms of maturity, in terms of future plans. The worst age to send your child overseas is just because you think they've reached a number on paper, and you take into account what's best for them and their well-being and their future plans. So I've evaded your question totally.
No, but I think you've answered perfectly. I think that's great. There's no perfect answer to that. It's all about that child, isn't it? Yeah, and you can't really compare, because my next door neighbor is sending their child at the age of 14, therefore I must do that. I think there's a lot of peer pressure going on in many of these home countries. If you live in an affluent area, you've got to do what your peers are doing. But you have to really ask yourself, what is the best thing for your child? And after all, it will be your child going abroad to study, not yourself, or certainly not your neighbor. Anyway, The same question to Lorraine, please.
I would completely agree with James. It really depends. You have to treat each child as an individual. And even within a family, just because you sent your elder child at the age of 11 doesn't mean that the next child is ready for it at the same age. Choose your school wisely, because every child has different needs, different interests. Choose a school where they're going to be happy. Because if they're going to be happy, they're going to learn. And that's really, really important. Don't always look at league tables, because they may be in an environment that is perhaps too oppressive for them, or they may flourish. It really, really does depend on the individual. And look carefully, particularly for international parents who are choosing schools for their children. If they're not native speakers of English, is there the support in that school for the EAL, English as an additional language, that student needs? Wouldn't you agree, Stuart?
Well, I think that all of that is true. I think often we hear the answer that, when should I send my child? The standard answer is the sooner the better. And obviously that there is some sense in that, because you want them to become familiar with things for all the reasons that James outlined. But it's the sooner the better, but only if they're ready for it, and if you're sure that you've got the right school for them. And I absolutely concur with the idea that the worst age to send your child is when they are not ready. That complete disaster. And then thinking about what is the end goal. You need to allow yourself enough time. You need to allow the child enough time to reach the end goal. And those who do think a long way ahead, as James has described, are really the parents that you have the greatest confidence in, because you're sure that they've thought the whole process through, and they're likely to make those sensible decisions, recognizing the individual nature of their child and getting that crucial right fit.
Indeed, always have the end goal in sight, and therefore you can work yourself backward. So if going to a boarding school in the UK, it's actually means to an end, isn't it? Because everybody, all the international families are thinking of is helping the child aim for that good universities. So with that in mind, is there an upper limit, age limit? What is the cutoff time, or the cutoff age that you really, really can't really send a child to a boarding school? Anything beyond that, it's just impossible to prepare. May I pose that question to Lorraine, please?
Yes, I think you have to really, really make sure that those students have the right level of English for whichever course they're attending. It is possible to leave it to about 17, and then you would really be looking at just an international foundation year, but that's leaving it late, and it's asking the student to really catch up on the style of learning that is very different in the UK to probably their home country. It's meaning that they have to be very mature. Parents do have to remember that a British education is likely to be more focused on problem solving rather than rote learning, and it's getting that student in the right mindset that they can access the curriculum not only with language but in style of learning.
Mm-hmm. And the same, may I ask James, please?
I mean, I agree, you know, there are lots of options, however late you leave it, as long as it's the most suitable option for you, you know. So Lorraine mentioned foundation programs. You know, there are places that offer a fast-track one-year A-level. Some students will complete their, you know, maybe complete 13 years of education and then come and do an extra year. And, you know, the key things are, what are you aiming for? What do they require? And are you going to be able to cope with this very compressed, very pressurized one-year course?
And Stuart, I mean, would you support a child coming at the age of 17? Or do you, in your mind, because of the school needs specific to your school, you would much prefer they come earlier?
I think parents need to understand the nature of the competition sometimes. We see some parents who have, you know, quite reasonable ambitions for their children, they're bright kids, but they don't necessarily understand who they're fighting for places against. And if you are, you know, one of the brightest kids in your country, and you think you can just come and apply successfully for places at top British universities, that's ignoring the competition that you're fighting against, because you're fighting against international competition that might have, you know, come and joined boarding schools when they're 11 or 13 or 14, and they have a massive advantage. So again, it's that longer term planning, and part of that longer term planning is understanding who you're fighting with, where there's competition for places. And if they're happy to, you know, accept that some of the less competitive universities would be fine, then, you know, again, then that might also work well. But
we might have, but I think what Stuart is saying here, keep your friends close, but your competitors or your enemies even closer. So coming to the UK, that means you're surrounded by your potential competitors if you're aiming for the really top universities. So a lot of the families, a lot of the parents, you know, are very, very alpha-driven but high-achieving parents. They all want their children to go to the best universities. And when they say the best, they look at their home country universities as well as the university in the UK and the US. And let's face it, it's Oxbridge and the Ivies, right? So how would you cope with parents who will consider, actually, I want them to have both. I want them to have a shot at Beida and Tsinghua in China, for example, but also at the same time, I want you to have a shot at Harvard and possibly Cambridge. Is that truly possible? How do you prepare that in a British boarding school? James, if I may ask you this.
Well, I think, I mean, first of all, you know, from a school point of view, and I was principal of an A-level college for a long time. You would never offer a place to a student unless you felt that what they needed you could provide. And I think, you know, one of the benefits of a boarding school is that the students and the principals, the heads, get to know the students very, very well. And it'll be a continuous process. You know, there won't come a point where a student suddenly decides they're going to apply to particular universities without having discussed it with anybody at the school, you know, for probably many years in advance of that. So I think it's, you know, a lot of it is managing expectations. I think a lot of it is also being honest with the parents and giving them a real assessment of, you know, what their sons or daughters are capable of, and also what the best fit. I mean, you've mentioned best fit before in terms of schools, but what the best fit universities are. I mean, I think to go back to your original question, which was, if somebody is at a boarding school but also wants to try for their home universities, I think that's going to be tricky because they will be out of the system in their home country. So I think if you're aiming for just your home universities, I mean, Hong Kong is slightly different because it's it's a little bit more of an international system. But otherwise, I think if you are going to go and study overseas, it's probably because you're committed to studying at a university overseas.
Thank you. That is very clear. Thank you. Lorraine, any thoughts?
Yes.
You'd like to add?
Obviously in boarding schools in the UK, students in year 12 and 13 will have their own personal tutor. These personal tutors will have given support and guidance for university selection to their tutees at great length. They're available outside curriculum time, and they will also be there to support parents understanding their sons or daughters' choices. So, as James said, it would be incredibly difficult to go back to China and study in a Chinese university. It's not impossible, particularly with the universities that are aligned to the UK, universities like Liverpool and Nottingham. But those students would only be able to get a British degree. They wouldn't be able to get the combined British and Chinese degree. But most parents, I believe, once they've made the choice for their son or daughter to come to the UK, are looking at the English-speaking market. And schools have lots of university counsellors within them who can support them with their applications for Canada, the US, Australia, and make sure that their sort of transcript and portfolio of evidence is the best it can be. So anywhere is an option for them, but as James said, a little bit more difficult in your home country. But you're really looking at the English-speaking market, and UK boarding schools are very, very well up to date with what the requirements are.
May I ask a follow-on question to you, Lorraine? Purely because you've had overseas experience as a head of a British brand, but overseas. So in your capacity as the head of an overseas school, have you seen the students, international students, actually matriculating to top universities in the UK and US? And how does that compare to students coming to the UK? I mean, is there one more advantageous than the other?
I've seen students in my experience overseas matriculate to a very good Russell Group and Oxbridge in the UK, and also universities like MIT in America. The difference, if you've got a good international brand school, those schools will teach the British curriculum. And although it's becoming more difficult in some countries, perhaps, if there is more of a leaning now to their home curriculum, but they will give as good a British curriculum as they possibly can. But it is those hidden nuances that we're able to give in country that really, really will allow them to flourish, and the accessibility to cultural events, to museums, to lectures, that they won't in quite the same way to be able to get in country. They can go to university open days very, very easily in a non-COVID world if they're based in the country. And it is, to be able to go to a lecture given by a university professor is very, very easy. And those are the hidden benefits of coming to the UK.
That's fantastic. And I guess the same will probably apply to younger children who are actually coming or either going to international schools in their home country or coming to the UK to do it and matriculating onto a good senior school that is robust enough to offer what Lorraine has said, the hidden nuances or the extra input that will get them to the next stage of the university. So Stuart, my question to you is, how would you advise your families who has sent their children to you at a very young age, maybe like a prep school age, and how would you help them choose the next stage?
I think I would like to echo one of the things that James said a few minutes ago, was about the honesty with parents. I was thinking also, as Lorraine was talking there, that one of the things that you don't always realize is just how much embedded expertise there is within the organization, within the country. And it's only as you advise larger numbers of students, you start to realize how much it is that you know. And being able to draw on a wide experience of knowing what the routes are, knowing what the level of competition is, knowing what the nature of particular schools is, that you realize you're actually able to add significant value to what parents are looking for. So it is about understanding the schools, understanding what their natures are, and then thinking about how that fits in that whole journey. So when we're talking to parents of much younger students, it is as important to us when they're 7 or 8 years old and trying to understand what the journey and ambitions are, as those who join us when they're 16 or 17. The same principles apply.
I think that's really fantastic. Taken from a school point of view, it's the accumulation of, almost like the quantifying the level of experience that you collected over the years, and that is just something money cannot buy, isn't it?
Now, yeah, I think it's this sort of idea almost of cumulative advantage, Susan, that you build on the advantage that you've accumulated, and every step builds even further on that you've been able to establish early on.
Yeah, and almost like the parents come to used to it in your college, and that's like a shortcut to success, however you wanted to define the success. So they do not have to go through the trials and error and maybe even fall into a pitfall. So that is the quality or the value of experience. So thank you for that, Stuart. Now, I'm going to swiftly turn into, speed this up a bit and say, because we've talked a lot about the merits of the British boarding school. So if parents are now very eager to say, yeah, this is what I want for my child, let's talk about how British boarding schools select the child. What do schools look for in terms of entrance testing, as well as the interview? And particularly, I want to pose this to panelists, is that, does the age of the child make a difference? So a younger child, would a child at the age of 11, would the testing and the interview be any different from a child coming at the age of 16? So Lorraine, if you would take the lead, please.
Okay, we're non-selective. But like many schools, we use something called the password test, and we use the maths and the English. And that is an age-specific test. So the test wouldn't be quite the same. That gives us a very good starting point. But at Padworth, what we particularly like is the interview. It's really important that if a student wants to come to the UK, are they going to engage with what we have to offer? Are they going to rise to the challenge of learning in a different country? Are they going to embrace all the activities that we've got on offer? Because the really wonderful thing about UK boarding schools is that it's a very holistic approach to education, and the fact that it's not just the classroom that we're educating students for, we're educating them for life. And how can we by talking to them, it's not something that parents can prepare them for, because who knows what Stuart and myself might ask them, because both of us are perfectly capable of going completely off-piste with our questions, and we just want to know that the student wants to work with the college and go on from there.
Yes, I think there are three general questions sort of at any age, Susan. You were asking about, how does it change, and is it the same for an 11-year-old or a 16-year-old? And I think there's a general, set of concerns. Obviously, we want to know that their English is strong enough for the group that they're going to join, because they're going to have to cope in class alongside native speakers. And if they feel as though they're being left behind, that's really a dreadful experience for them. So it's a confidence to feel that they can cope. And this is critical to what we're doing at Bishopstrow. It's developing those English skills, making sure that when they do go into the next school, that they fit in perfectly and feel confident and make good progress. And generally, how ready are they for the whole process of boarding? Some of those broader things that Lorraine was identifying. And then I was thinking about your question about when they're rather older. And of course, then particularly if they're looking at getting into the more competitive British boarding schools, you're talking about getting into sixth forms of those schools that are pretty much already full. So the competition is really very stiff. So it's then preparing them, much more in terms of being able to answer actually quite difficult questions, and not just the difficult questions that are written on the exam paper, but the difficult questions that Lorraine was identifying, where we take something which is completely off the script and get them to think in a different way and try and see, how are they going to cope, not just in any old class, but in a class where they're alongside some of the most articulate and ambitious native speakers. So it's that type of understanding that are the sorts of things that that the schools will be looking for.
Yeah, before we move on to James, could I do a follow-up question on that? Because you both and Lorraine mentioned about off the script. Could you just share with the audience here, just give us a few examples, what sort of questions are off the script that would normally catch the students by surprise? That's first thing. Secondly is if you could give us an idea, when you talk about competitive schools, they're really selective schools, is there a ratio, like how many students apply for one place? So Stuart, to you first, please.
Yeah, the sort of off script stuff is what do you think about the political situation and then choose a country? Just choose something out of the news that they won't have prepared for. When you've got scientists, I like to ask them questions like, why don't bridges fall down? International students, quite often things related to aeroplanes, because they all know about aeroplanes, but the science of aeroplanes, they think they know lots of science and they can tell you lots of things that are on their syllabus, but getting them to think about something which isn't really tests whether they can use what they know and develop that.
Yeah, in a similar way, Susan, a student that tells me that they like reading a book or they like poetry, I will develop that and ask them what they're reading. And one poor student recently told me that they were reading a Dylan Thomas piece, and we went off on that. And the poor boys that I interview that tell me they like rugby, they don't realise what lady they've got in front of them, because rugby is my passion, and away we go. But it's they deliver something to us, and I will try as much as I can to find out whatever it is. So don't come for an interview with me or Stuart and say I like reading Jane Austen, because we'll pick it to pieces. Because the number of students that told me that they like Sherlock Holmes, and I've said, what's a deerstalker? This is a basic introduction, and they've watched Sherlock, the programme. Don't do it. Be prepared for us to really pick them to pieces.
Oh, excellent. Oh my God, that just goes to show really have to do your homework, isn't it, as an interviewee? That brought memories back from the days when I went for Cambridge for my interview. I was meant to get a professor in architecture, but here came in was someone in history of art, because the architect was actually ill on the day. And that guy who interviewed me was actually an expert in Chinese art. And I was going to go in and talk about Chinese art, and I thought, maybe not. Maybe let him speak then. Sorry, Stu, you're going to say something.
Yes, you were also asking the question about just how competitive is it?
Yes, please.
I don't know those exact ratios, but what I do sometimes think about is, when you talk about applying to Cambridge, every year Cambridge has 5,000 undergraduate places available. If you look at the very most competitive schools in the UK and say, well, how many spare places have they got going at sixth form this year? It's not going to be 5,000. It might not be 500. So you're talking about serious competition.
Yeah, definitely. If you do the numbers straight, isn't it? And a lot of these schools, very selective schools, the numbers of new intakes they take on at the age of 16 is far smaller than the numbers they take in at the age of 11 plus, 13 plus. So in a way, if you just look at the numbers, much easier to get in at the younger age, isn't it? Yeah. Now, James, I have not forgotten about you. I'm coming back to you because I know that you have so much experience with, prepping students for Oxbridge. I remember we had a conversation. You once said, there was once a question that says, is an apple dead or alive? That came up as a question, wasn't there? One of the Oxbridge entrants. But would you like to share, off the script, what kind of question do you normally ask your students?
I do quite a lot of work, as you say, preparing students for interviews and things. And so we always start from the basis of their personal statement, and always start looking at, what they want to tell you about themselves. And then, as Stuart says, and Lorraine said, I would start asking them questions about current events, about things related to what they want to study, pick up things in the personal statement. And I think, the idea of Oxford interviews, your one sounds very interesting with the Chinese history of art. I think the thing to realize, both with schools and with universities, is they're not trying to catch the students out. They're not trying to trap the students or humiliate the students. They're trying to draw out the students' real interests and as something Lorraine said right at the very beginning, their problem solving or their critical thinking and that sort of thing. So I think, lots of students, a lot of myths about applying for Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard or wherever, or the boarding schools in the UK, that the interview is some sort of trap. It's not. It's there to let the student demonstrate their knowledge, their awareness of what's going on in the world and that sort of thing. And a lot of the time, I've done quite a lot of university interviews. I've been on quite a lot of university medical school panels which interview students, and always they're trying to bring out the best in the students.
I didn't quite catch it. Bring out the best.
To try and let the student bring out, what's most important to them. To let the students show what they're capable of, what their interests are.
Yeah, definitely. So I love the point where you made that the schools, the university are not trying to catch the students out. They just want to provide a platform for that student to shine at that moment. And they're really looking for people who can contribute, isn't it? So one point that Lorraine brought was that engaging, someone who are willing to, come out of their room, and sort of have a conversation with your mates, rather than, stay in your room and do your work, and probably even worse, be on the game machine all the time, isn't it? It's that engagement where you make friends at a younger age, because friends that you make at school, they're for life. Yeah, they could be your future business buddies, isn't it? I'm sure, a lot of us will have that sort of experience. Okay, now, this question, I'm sure a lot of the audience will be thinking about. Is it better to choose a school with a lot of international students or very few international students? So may I ask Stuart first?
Yeah, sure. I think if a school is entirely international and you're looking for a British education, then you need to know why it's entirely being international is advantageous. So if you take Bishopstrow as perhaps the prime example, we are entirely international. And why does that make us a good choice for those whose ambition is to go on to a British boarding school? And the key thing about the Bishopstrow process is that by being entirely international, at that crucial stage where we're the interface, the transition between being at home and being away in the UK, is that everything that we do is focused on the needs of the international student at that stage. And I remember talking to a couple of recent Bishopstrow students just after they'd moved to their boarding school, and they were saying how much more easily they'd been able to settle in than other new international boarders. And it was really fascinating talking to them, because they said they realized that the Bishopstrow staff were entirely focused on what their needs were as international students, and almost predicting and second guessing what they would need from day to day, from hour to hour, and within each lesson in order to make that transition as comfortably, effectively, and quickly as possible. So it is that decision. Now, if you're looking at an international school with only international students or very largely international students, can you identify specific things that structure is going to do particularly well that make it the right school at the right time for your child? If you can't identify what the advantages are, then I think you perhaps need to ask yourself the question about why you would choose an international school in Britain when actually you think you're looking for a British education.
Definitely. I mean, I always look at the outcome, the performance of our own, my company students, those who actually gone through a preparatory boarding experience at a place such as Bishopstrow will eventually do far much better than those who go straight into a boarding school. And it's just weird. And next time, perhaps I will offer some sort of quantifiable statistics, because we've been doing this for over a decade now. But, without every time it just doesn't make any exception. It's always those who've been through a preparatory, they will fare much better. Now, same question to Lorraine, please.
I think it's really important that parents actually, I'm not going to answer the question exactly to start with, actually look at how many boarders are in that boarding school on the weekend. So forget whether you're looking for an international or a British boarding school. If you're coming to the UK, you want your son and daughter to be completely engaged and embracing everything that a school's got to offer. Is that school offering a full boarding experience? Is everybody there? What's the structure of activities? Because this is all part of that hidden curriculum. So rather than worry too much about international or British, are they going to be able to be fully engaged? Are they going to, or are they going to be on their own? And that, I think, they will make friends with their friend, with people in school who have got the same interests. They'll have a wonderful time, but you actually need a big enough number for them to actually engage in that hidden curriculum.
Yeah, I think weekend boarding numbers is so important. There are so many schools that say, yes, we offer boarding to all, but if you actually visit them on a weekend, you realize all they're left are the international students, and the numbers are so small. I mean, Lorraine, this is just a follow-up. Is there a particular number in mind that you think will be a very good benchmark? Like how many students over the weekend and during the evenings on a weekday that you think is good to ensure that there is a great boarding atmosphere in that boarding house?
I think probably what you want is a school that has a range of nationalities, because what you don't want is a particular sort of ethnic clique, so that they're all focused on that particular country's interest. You want to stimulate students so that they're engaging in English, they're engaging in lots of pastimes. So it's not just number, it's looking at the overall population of the school, and so that they can enjoy the networking and the long-term opportunities, as well as the fun that they can have with those activities.
Okay, well, thank you for that. James, so your school, well, in previously, your school has a lot of international students. So do you feel that that's given these students who would later on move on to university an extra advantageous sort of elements?
Well, I mean, first of all, I agree entirely with what Stuart and Lorraine have said. I mean, in my experience, it's not the number of international students that's important. So the question that parents always ask is not how many international students, but how many students from my own country. And I think that, those are two different things. And I think quite often, it doesn't matter really what the ratio is, but having exposure to students from other cultures and other countries, and not necessarily just British students, is very advantageous. I think the real question is how many students are at a particular school from my own country, and that's the thing that's important for parents, because they don't like the answer 0. because they worry that it's going to be difficult for their son or daughter to fit in. They don't like to hear that 50% of the students in a school is from, from the same city that they come from, because, what is the point of then traveling overseas for that? So I think it's more to do with the mix rather than the overall number of international students.
So in your opinion, is there a sweet spot, James?
I think it depends very much on the student. It depends on the school. It depends on what their ambitions are. I think one of the things about if you were looking for a boarding school, you're going to do your research, or you're going to work through agents who know those schools very well, and they'll also be able to give their opinion of whether it's a suitable environment or not. So I think a number is probably, as Lorraine said, it's the wrong way to look at it. Just in terms of numbers, it's what the experience of the student is going to be. And certainly, I've worked in schools where there are very few international students in a boarding school, 2 or 3, and I've worked in places where 50, 60, 70% of the students are international. And it's really the mix of students, not the number, which is the most important thing.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, James.
Susan.
Okay. I understand that there is a question coming through, and that I will touch upon later. So thank you very much for that question from Ali. Okay, very soon I will ask that for you. Now, before we move on to pastoral side of things, I just want to ask. Many traditional schools, when I say traditionals, are schools that they're rigid with the entry point, the 11 plus, 13 plus, and then goes on to 16, doesn't even offer 14 plus. Okay. Some of these traditional schools are now increasingly offer flexibility to take on international students at a non-standard entry year, say 12-year-old, 14-year-old, and even 15-year-old. So as an international parent, when they're coming, when a child is at the age of 15 or 12, should they consider a school that is solely preparing international schools to move on to a senior school, such as Bishopstrow, or should they just send them directly to that traditional school? So this is really a very direct question for you, Stuart. How would you suggest and recommend to the parents?
As ever, it will depend on the child. Some might be ready for that absolute movement, but I think, as you were saying yourself, Susan, there's such clear evidence that those who get the specialist introduction before they make that step fly rather higher, rather faster. And I think it seems to be that the trajectory alters. Somehow, if they get the opportunity to have that initial preparation, they feel more confident, they make progress faster, and they then head at that line rather than taking a while to settle in before they start to accelerate. So we have plenty of evidence to suggest that transitional phase is really successful for them. But in terms of the actual entry point itself, well, there's nothing wrong with 12 plus, 14 plus, 15 plus, but they would nevertheless still benefit from that transitional phase.
Okay, well, thank you. I think that should really clarifies a lot of the queries in the audience's mind. Lorraine, would you like to add any take to that?
Perhaps coming in at the non-traditional times, parents need to be aware that maybe the curriculum isn't as broad, because it may be that they've missed too much of the previous work in that key stage. Or maybe that particular child needs more support for EAL. So it really depends, as Stuart started off with saying, it depends on the child. And that's really what I think all of us are saying all the time. Each child is an individual to us, but parents need to be aware that the curriculum may be slightly shrunk.
Definitely. I think that's point taken. James, would you like to add your 2 cents?
Very, very quickly, picking up on something Stuart said, I know Bishopstrow very well, and quite often students will apply directly to a boarding school, and the school will say, yes, we'll consider you, but we want you to go to Bishopstrow first because we think you'll be much better prepared. And I think the other thing is about the non-standard entry points. A high proportion of students who are coming to boarding schools in the UK work with agents, and the agent plays a really important part in this as well, because the agent will be able to, if they've got the real intimate knowledge of the schools, will be able to talk to the parents and recommend options and things as well. So I think the agent plays a very important part in that.
Oh yeah, definitely. I will take that point onward. Agents play a very pivotal point when advising families, helping manage that expectation and communicating with the schools about the family's expectation. And on that note, I would like to pose a question from the audience. So like I previously said, a lot of the families who are intending to send their children abroad, they are very, very high achievers themselves. So they have great expectation of their children. Many of these children, some fare really well, academic, very, outstanding gregarious, but some are not. But often they need, they will have to go out because the parents say so. So there lies this mismatch of intention, ability, and the eventual performance. How do schools help the agents as well as the families and the children? Really, it's the children who are actually being put in a disadvantaged stage here, to help manage this misaligned expectation. If students complain of not settling well, because initially they should not have come out in the first place. So I'd like to hear, maybe you have some live experiences that you could share with us on how you manage to deal with situations like this.
Susan, that's a lovely question, isn't it?
Yes, that we face every day. Yes.
And the answer has always got, I think, to be it's care. It's the school that cares, that where it's going to make the difference. You've got these young people, whether they're 7 or 17, so you could get very young 17-year-olds that it doesn't feel right for them, or they might be these little people age 7. And it's really just taking tremendous care of them and them knowing that they're cared about. And they've got to know that they're cared about by us in the school, and they've got to know that mum and dad still care. Mum and dad still love them, and all of those things. And it's then working with the parents and working with the agents and listening to the child, of working your way through that. You've got to start by just, understanding where they are emotionally. They're really upset. That might be your starting point. And then you take it from there.
Thank you. I think care is so important, isn't it? Because after all, we are dealing with minors, children, and they're not adults. They need to be nurtured, to be hand-holding. So anybody at different points of this sphere, if you imagine the child is this sphere, at different points, whether it's the school, the agent, the parents, we all have a touching point, and we need to do our best to support that child. But also, I think one of the panelists mentioned, be realistic with the parents. Whether the child is here or there, we have to really set it at the get-go, so that later on it doesn't transpire into an ugly conversation. Lorraine, would you like to share your take on this?
Yes, I think it's obviously the care is the key point, but it's having staff who engage with those students. So finding out what that particular child as an individual really likes, what makes them tick, and if they've got a passion about castles, then one of your weekend trips, go to Windsor, take them to see a castle. It's that engagement with students, having a proper induction program so that the student feels confident that they know who to go to, how they can have that support, and keeping them busy in a nice, fun way where they're learning but just engaging with as many people as possible. Because if they're slightly lacking in confidence, the more people they meet, they'll meet kindred spirits. So there's a whole range of things. What makes them tick, and try and use your student council, your boarding house, tutors, to find out what your particular boarding population wants, and then feed it, enhance it.
I think, Lorraine, I want to really highlight one word you said: busyness. Busy. Keep the students busy, because I think if the students are so busy, they don't even have the time to think that they're bored or they're upset and they're homesick, isn't it? So keep them busy, but good busy. Yes. Things that really get them engaged and interested in it. in. So the teachers, I think the boarding houses, the staff really need to get to know this international student very well.
Very important.
James, what's your opinion on this?
Again, I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, communication is the key thing. You know, I mean, any issue is going to get worse if there isn't communication going on between the student and the school and the parents, and the agents, you know, is quite often the conduit for communication with the parents. And the longer problems are left, the bigger the problems will become. So I think that sort of the communicating on all levels is the way to identify problems and then sort out problems. I mean, one of the things which is, this is slightly off the topic, but you know, there's been, as you know, quite a surge in online agencies recently with agent aggregation or agent aggregators, where basically you can apply for multiple schools or multiple universities at the click of a button. And the personal touch of the agent is taken out of the equation completely. But the agent is a really important route of communication between the student, the school, and the parents.
Yeah, I think we're dealing with human beings and little human beings, and this, you know, it's very much to say that you can buy a book or buy groceries online, but can you really just define a young child's future education purely via technology or via platform? I have a question mark on that. So thank you for raising that point, James. I think it's very critical, especially in this day and age. We use technology so much, and sometimes we feel there is that lack of human touch.
Yeah. And I think that agents can play such a crucial role in making, you know, making it possible for the child to settle in. That, you know, we're wanting to understand what the parent has heard from the child. The child's been on the phone to the parent. You know what James was saying, the parent needs to be able to talk to the agent, and the agent needs to talk to us, so we know what the message is that we're hearing, so that we all know what's going on. And very often, you know, sort of thinking about, you know, simple advice is to parents, please listen to the school. If the school is saying, please don't answer the phone every 5 minutes when your child calls you, we've probably got a very good reason for saying that, and that we're probably trying to keep them busy, as Lorraine is saying, and introduce them and share activities and make friends. And you know, we've got, you know, one of the things I think is perhaps reassuring the parents that, you know, the British boarding schools have loads of experience at doing this. They will be really good at helping your child settle in. If you've got any worries, let them know, you know, all of those things. But we, you know, we see it all the time. We're very good at helping the kids settle in, and they do settle in. They have fun, and you know, very rarely is it something that lasts a long time.
Now, where were you, Stuart, when I was an international student, first arrived in this country many years ago? Because this topic actually is very close to my heart. When I first arrived here at a tender age of 13, I was actually bullied in the school ground because of my poor English. So I can definitely see the value in what Stuart's College, as well as Lorraine College, and the services that James bring out. If I knew you guys back then, I think I would have a much easier life then, and didn't have to struggle all on my own. Now, this past year has been really difficult for everyone. The pandemic, you know, the virus, in fact, is still going on. And as we all know, it's much more worse in America, but it's happening here in the UK as well. So East and Southeast Asians have been wrongfully ostracized because of the pandemic. A lot of Asians have been, you know, made equivalent to the virus. So I'd like to know, what have your schools done to help protect your young international students, particularly from these regions? Stuart, please.
Well, I'm glad to say that hasn't been our widespread experience. Maybe because we're in rural Wiltshire, that, you know, it's not something that our students have experienced, but it is something that we've been aware of, and it's something that we've made our students aware of in an appropriate way, just to say that, you know, be careful just in case, you know, forewarned is forearmed, all of those things. So it's been, you know, advising them to be aware of it, to be slightly careful of it, and that, you know, given the age of our students, they are always, particularly at the moment, out accompanied, and we will be, careful about group sizes. So we're not, perhaps, to make sure that we're not inviting the wrong type of comment, because they'd be saying, what are you doing, group of 20 when there's only supposed to be a group of 6? So we're not, even though that's permissible for educational settings, so we're being careful not to, perhaps invite other types of criticism that would then lead on to other things. So it's being aware, it's preparing them, but thankfully, as I say, down here in Wiltshire, we haven't seen anything of it.
Well, that's good to know. Lorraine, how about you? Have you had any direct experience of such?
No, not amongst our students. We're very much like Bishopstrow. We are, although we're in West Berkshire and only 40 minutes away from Heathrow, we are in a rural haven. The students here, we have restricted up to now, following government guidance on where they can go. We've been doing a lot of outside activities, so we've been doing a lot of walks, and exactly like Stuart, we have monitored the size of the group. A lot of the time, if it's appropriate, they are accompanied by staff, as a form of protection, but we haven't encountered any problems. And we've done an awful lot of school-based activities. Padworth students seem to like food quite a lot, and everything we do seems to be focused on chocolate and baking, and they will be so prepared for university. They're going to be so popular with all their flatmates because they know how to make every cake under the sun. But we have moved on to sushi this week.
Oh, good. Something healthy, balanced. James, how would you advise your students, about to come out to the UK, to just watch out for all these, things coming up from media and all things happening in the real world?
Well, the students I'm dealing with are obviously coming over for university rather than for school, so they're slightly more mature. I mean, I think the universities have been very, very good at this. I think the precautions the universities are taking, the amount of advanced information, the preparation, the pre-departure information for international students, I think it's been very, very impressive. At a lot of universities, at most universities, I think there are differences. But I think also, a lot of the students are already at international schools. So they're getting the benefit of the school's advice and things as well.
Okay, good. It's good to know that all the international students, whatever age they are being prepared and also being guided on these matters. Now, the next point is UK is finally coming out. We are in the last final stage of coming out of this lockdown. So schools are already reopening. So I'm sure Lorraine's school and Stuart's school have welcomed the international students back, and many more will be joining this summer and September. So my final question to the panelists would be, what are the key takeaways you've actually got from the whole of last year during the pandemic? And how have you implemented these key learnings to maybe your curriculum or maybe your new developments within the college that new students could actually come to expect in the coming September? So shall we start with Lorraine first, please?
I suppose the biggest thing for us is the level of upskilling that we've all done to learn how to use things like Teams and Zoom. But the key takeaways is there's never going to be a snow day or anything like that in the UK ever again, because all of my staff will be able to teach students, whether they're at Padworth or at home, all the time. It's certainly, I think, led to a good level of engagement from teachers and staff. The fact that, if they are stuck because of a visa in the future, they can still take part. We've all learnt how to use breakout rooms, and they can engage with learning wherever they are in the world. It's much better to have face-to-face. I think we all acknowledge that. But the technology means that there's no barriers to learning for us if there are some reasons why we can't all be together.
Oh, that's most excellent. So your teachers will be always on. Well, I hope they get time off as well.
Aren't they lucky?
Stuart, how about you? Are the younger kids end?
I think there are two surprises that we have been left with as the result of our lockdown experiences. 18 months ago, Bishopstrow was a college where students had no electronic devices, pretty much. They were allowed their phone for brief periods so that they could keep contact with home, but largely no phones, no laptops, and that was all because we were wanting to maximize their practice at English. Now, we had one computer room that needed to be booked for anything that was specifically going to be done on computer. And I think that we have been surprised to find that there are things which we are recognizing we don't want to lose from the opportunity of having IT always available. We're absolutely convinced that we're not going to be using it as our sole means of teaching. Face-to-face is definitely better, but there are some things that having the IT available has given us opportunities for. So I think we are likely to be saying that we do want children to bring laptops with them. They won't be using them all that often, but we have identified times when using them is better than not using them. And it means that every classroom becomes a potential computer suite when you need it. The second thing is related to the out-of-class experience. And we've been really very pleasantly surprised by just how positively students have responded to and enjoyed perhaps the lower tech, more local type of activity. We've got kids really enjoying doing walks out in the country because they enjoy the fresh air, they enjoy the conversation, they enjoy getting to know each other in a different way, and things that you might have thought, well, actually, unless it's a sort of super jazzy something or other as the activity for this evening or this weekend, but actually we have learned that I remember listening to my mum and dad talking about when they were children and all the things that they used to do, the things that they made their own entertainment and how great it was. Well, actually, I think that we have learned that 21st century children are no different. They love this sort of things too. And I think we'll be doing a bit more of that because we've discovered how much they really enjoy it.
So back to basic, but with the help of technology. James, do you see the older kids and coming to the university? I mean, what are your key takeaways from this in helping them make the journey?
I think one of them, the biggest surprise is how little effect it's had on people's ambitions or to study overseas. A lot of families have planned this for many years. They're going to international schools because they want to study overseas. They want to go to university overseas, or they're going to boarding schools because they want to study overseas. And that COVID hasn't really had an enormous effect on people wanting to study overseas. What it's done is made them think a little bit more carefully about what might be the most suitable country for them, or the most suitable environment for them, or the most suitable university for them. So they're looking at the value of what they'll get from it. They're looking at what might be the safest environments. And I think something which is not a surprise is the effect that or the realization that a boarding school environment is a very, very good, safe way to study, to proceed to the next stage.
Oh, I definitely echo what you say. It's not just a safe place, but this goes way back to our very first question about what are the actual key merits of boarding school. I believe all three of you have mentioned, the soft skills, the things that you prepare you, not just the academic exam, but also how to interact as a human being, how to communicate, how to be a good employee or a good business partner. And these are things that you really engage and pretty pick up during your lifetime at a boarding school. And these are, it's intangible things, isn't it? The boarding school soft skills that will impart to the children for life. So I think that's a fantastic way of ending today's panel discussion. And I hope, we've all enjoyed it today. And thank you so much for the very lovely panelists we have here, Stuart, Lorraine, James. You've brought in all your expertise of all different levels at different stages. And it's been truly a privilege for me to moderate this, hopefully, to everyone, a very exciting and productive discussion. Now, maybe we have some time still, towards the end to open up for questions, if there's any. I mean, I know that we've answered a few as we go along, but if there anybody want to unmute themselves and just ask questions to the panelists, we're very happy to take it on.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you for moderating this session. It's been a fantastic session. So can we open up the floor? Does anybody have any questions?
Alternatively, you could put it in the chat. I'll be very happy to convey that to the panelists for you.
I might be told off now because I didn't introduce Mark Jeans at the beginning. So I'm looping Mark in. So Mark's here as well. Hi, Mark.
You're not going to get told off, don't worry, but thank you.
So you can ask Mark any questions you have as well.
I'm looking out for questions.
I have a question.
Oh, Kate has her hands raised.
Thank you. So I'm just really interested in how you advise a student that an agent was to send you, that you really saw the potential for that student, but wasn't quite ready to enter either, well, Bishopstrow or Padworth. I mean, how would you advise that parent?
I'm thinking about Bishopstrow. In terms of English level, because we take students from very low level, particularly if they're younger, then they'd be able to come to us on that basis. If it's for other reasons, then it's again about that journey. I think, Kate, it's knowing where are they coming from, where are they trying to get to, and think, well, what type of support and preparation, likely to be some one-to-one support, developing something if it's English based, maybe a short stay in the UK if you think they're not ready to come for a term. I think that journey process. We get quite a lot of youngsters who might start with this sort of initial one-to-one some learning English, then come for a short period in a very sort of contained environment, then an academic summer for 5 weeks at Bishopstrow, then they come for a bit longer. And eventually, it may be a long journey, but that's very carefully designed and very carefully built.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
And pretty much the same at Padworth. It would really depend on what age they were, what level of English they had. We would certainly recommend that if their English level wasn't at the right level for whichever sort of key stage that they were aiming at, that we would recommend that they got some support, probably one-to-one. And like Stuart says, maybe come to the UK and immerse themselves either in a host family, or maybe try Bishopstrow's pre-sessional courses. It really depends on each student and how they present themselves.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Any other questions? Maybe not. So should we end here? It's been an hour and a half session anyway. So thank you so much again for everybody joining us this afternoon. Thank you so much, Susan, for moderating the session. James, thank you so much for joining us from Thailand. We really appreciate your time, and thank you, Lorraine and Stuart as well. And thank you, Mark, for being host. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Thanks, Susan.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.